and always. So tonight, we're welcoming a pioneering female engineer and Valpo graduate, Beverly Schultz. I could go over her very exemplary biography with you, but we're gonna let Bev introduce herself and talk a little bit about some of her career highlights, and then we'll go into a Q&A, and then you all will have an opportunity to ask questions yourself. So with that, Beverly.
Hi, I'm Bev Schultz, and live in Boston, and have spent probably 30 years in the engineering industry in numerous different places. And I'm not going to talk very much about them, but I'll try to give you examples as we go through questions and whatever. But I started in industry building little machines that would find cracks in airplane wings. And that was years ago, and airplanes were crashing because their wings had cracks in them. And with a very clever and cute little device, which I would write the software for, but the hardware team built the device, we were able to use a laser to find the problems without pulling the piece out and actually having to cause cracks in the airplane wings while they were figuring out what they were doing. That was one of my very first assignments, and it was fun. And I found that all phases of engineering were fun. I started with a master's degree in computer science. I started working in the software engineering end of the thing. But most of what I did, whether it was building something to detect these cracks, I was building software that worked with hardware and made the hardware move. And over a period of time, I built plant management systems for General Electric, for some of the big pharmaceutical companies. And with plant management systems, you had a lot of fun technology that you had to figure out how to put it into software and make something available for people to use and have fun with, and to use for specific purposes. After that, I spent time in pure software. I built compilers, I built case tools, I built office software, operating systems. I was in charge of building an operating system. And all those things are pure software, but they're needed. And so there were ways of people talking to a computer. You had to have a language, so we created the language, and you had to be able to work with that. So today, if you use C or Java or whatever, somebody's built those compilers so that you talk to them. That was fun. And then as I moved on, I was really very tied with computer graphics, and took graduate work in computer graphics classes, and there were a lot of ways to tie that computer graphics into what I wanted to do, and so I spent some time at Avid Technology doing video editing systems. Many of you can get a video editing system now for free with your operating system, but at that time it was probably the only game in town, and we were building video editing systems. My engineers, we built clever enough things that my engineers received 2 Academy Awards in Hollywood for the technology that we built, and so which means it affected people that were doing sitcoms and movies and commercials and whatever they wanted to do. So that was fun. We spent some time doing that. Then I kind of gravitated from graphics into chips. I did a number of semiconductor chips. I built 2D chips that went into Dell computers, and there are a lot of Dell computers, so that for a number of years, if you bought a Dell computer, it was our 2D chip. And we built the first 3D chip that was available for PCs, and that was also a good challenge to be able to exponentially handle the work that was available there. From there, I moved into Mitsubishi Electric, and I helped them build a volume rendering chip, which allowed people to be able to see in 3 dimensions rather than with flat surfaces or pixels. We used voxels, 3-dimension rendering, and in real time, we could see and do the work that we did. And I brought one little, we're talking about building a chip that might cost several $1 million before you're done with the chips. The final chip is it, can you see it in there? It's a little teeny tiny, size of your thumbnail, and could do all the work that we needed it to do. And so you have to really design well so that it can be fabricated with very small spaces. And I also did some process control systems. In most cases, I was a VP of engineering or a senior engineering manager, managed up to 250 to 300 engineers. And so had a lot of leadership skills that I'm happy to talk about with all of you. You're probably going to be going out into some field, and it might not be engineering, and if it's not engineering, a lot of what you do in technology is applicable in other places. A lot of what I did was business, because we had to follow the business, or as a VP of engineering, you're usually an executive officer of the company, so that you have to know business as well as engineering. So that's kind of a quick overview.
Yeah. Well, there's so many great stories. So I had the privilege of reading Bev's book, and there are so many great stories that I want to make sure that we touch on tonight. But I want to start with your time here at Valparaiso University in the early 60s. You were a math major. When you were kind of sitting in class, what did you think your professional life might look like?
I was a math major, and I assumed that I was going to be a math teacher. I was, in the 60s, women were teachers or nurses. That's kind of our choices, and it was, I loved abstract mathematics, so being able to teach mathematics was my direction.
Well, in the book you talk about being 34 and kind of settled into life as a high school math teacher and wife and mom. What was it that kind of drove you not only to go back to school, but to go back to school on top of everything else? Because you were teaching and kind of managing your life at the same time that you were choosing to go back for this degree that was a fairly new degree at the time.
Right.
And so what was really kind of your motivating force to kind of go and do all of that on top of this life that you'd already kind of established for yourself?
I would count professors at Valpo for doing a lot for me. John Sorensen was a math professor when I was a freshman, and I was able to know him and took classes from him for all 4 years. And he was always pushing me to forget about teaching in a high school and doing more abstract math and do mathematics, because he liked what I could do in mathematics. And then finally, in my senior year, he said, okay, Valpo offered a master's degree in education. If I would stay here, and if I wanted to be a high school teacher, I'd stay here and get a degree in education, and I could be his graduate assistant in the math department, so that he had somebody strong enough to be able to handle his classes. And that made me think a little bit. Of course, I wanted to go on and get another degree, but I didn't think I wanted it to be in education, and so that limited it. But at that point, Valpo professors listen to them. They come up with a lot of good suggestions and directions, and he certainly made me think, well, is this what I want to do? Do I want to stay in education? Then when I went out in industry, now my husband was in the Air Force, and so he moved often. He was moved often. And as we moved, if you're in education, you don't have tenure if you keep moving. And so pretty soon you'll move yourself out of a job, because if you've been in 7 years, and instead you can hire a college graduate, that's a lot cheaper. So they will not keep hiring you if you move around a lot. And so I had no tenure. And so when I was ready to go back for a degree in mathematics, I went over and looked at the math department. My husband was an electrical engineer and was telling me how big the need was for computer science people. So he had said that. So I went over to the math department, and I saw this beautiful bulletin board, and it had all these things on it that told what they were doing in mathematics in Europe and what they were doing in mathematics in other places. And it was all interesting to me. It was all fun. I loved the whole board. And then I went around the corner to the computer science department, and their bulletin board all had all job offers. And so it was like, this is silly to be in abstract mathematics when I could still teach if I had a choice with a degree in computer science. But it was a much more interesting to put the mathematics into the computer area.
You know, I think it's interesting in talking with undergraduates, and I think especially as you get into kind of your junior and senior year and you're starting to think more about what you're going to do immediately post-Valpo, there's a lot of anxiety around your first job, that somehow if you don't get the right first job or it's not exactly what you want, that somehow you compromise in a way that doesn't feel right. But you know, your first job as a math teacher was not exactly what you wanted to be doing. But that, you know, in the book you talk about how, you know, the first job at System Research Laboratories, that you were actually teaching about microprocessors, and that in a lot of ways the teaching experience ended up being really valuable, even though that wasn't necessarily, you know, what you wanted to do. But if you could talk a little bit about kind of how to find value in those first early jobs that maybe aren't, you know, necessarily the thing, but how they prepare you for the thing.
What you need when you graduate from school is experience. And if you've had internships or whatever, you've got a little bit of experience. But people want you to have experience before they give you other things. And so your first job isn't real important to be right doing exactly what you want to do, but gets you in the door. And if you can do it well, then people notice that you can do it well. And pretty soon you're given something that's more interesting. Or you can look around the school, the industry that you're in, and say, I'd really like to be doing what's going on over there. Or you can have lunch with people and say, wow, these two people are doing something really cool. And you're inside already, you're in the company, and then all you have to do is figure out how you can then be moved over into another area. But it's always important to have a base of knowledge that you can tell people, well, I know how to do this. I know how to do this well, and that could apply to something else that you want to do. Yeah, that's important.
Another thing that I found just remarkable about your early work life is your ability to advocate for yourself in terms of the schedule that you needed to make your life work. You were kind of doing this work-life balance thing beautifully before work-life balance, I feel, was like a common term in how we think about our professional lives. How did you go about kind of advocating for your schedule, or maybe more specifically, how would you kind of talk with, you know, students today about how to kind of know when to say, like, this is what I need, and really kind of advocate for yourself versus needing to compromise around things like schedule and kind of the ways in which your work life impacts, you know, everything else outside of your workspace?
I think what we need to do, we usually figure out how to do. and I had 3 children. I was in the field of computer science, and computer science, you really, you don't have to have scheduled hours, and there are people that often just work nights because they work better at night or they work better in the daytime. A lot of engineering jobs are similar to that, where you can set your own hours. So even if, as you're a manager, you want to be there at different times of the day to make sure you connect with everybody that's there. Computer science was an easy thing, which is way easier today, because years ago we had mainframes, and we took a terminal home, and when the children went to bed, I had another hour or 2 I could go back to this terminal and connect back to my server or my mainframe. And today you can do a lot of work from home or from other places than where you go. So you can do a lot of things to rearrange schedules.
I thought it was really interesting that one of the things that you were so good about doing throughout your career, and you kind of taught, and it feels like each new chapter that you were starting, you would say, and then there was an opportunity to do this, and I hadn't done it before, so I was like, let's do that. Or when you were applying for new jobs, and you would have 2 different job offers. One that was more money and something that but you'd already done that. And then you choose the other opportunity that's something that you hadn't done before. And you were just so aware of wanting to challenge yourself with new things and kind of build new habits, and that I think, that amount of self-awareness I think is somewhat exceptional. I think people work a long time to build that, and you seem to kind of come to that naturally. But how would you talk about kind of finding the rhythm between developing expertise and being open to trying new things that push you to develop new expertise?
I think you're all in college and you're learning, and you want to be learning all the time. You don't want some job that doesn't stretch your mind and give you a challenge. So you want to kind of watch for that. But you really don't want to be in a job where you've done the same thing over and over and over again. So don't. It's just there's lots of opportunities, and I think we get so cornered into one thing that we say, well, I'm comfortable here. I don't need to ever try anything else. I like what I'm doing. But there's so many other things around you, so check them out. And I think one of the things that's really important, I mentioned that to the group this afternoon, is that you respect your immediate manager when you go into the job. You don't have to even like the job, but you have to respect the manager that you're going to be reporting to, if that's your project leader or whatever it is, because he's going to have you do things, and you want to be able to say, okay, I'll do those, because you trust that he's figured out when your piece is done and the other 7, 10, 20 pieces are done, they're all going to come together and something good's going to happen. So you really do have to have that confidence in your immediate manager.
I'd like to tie in your story with some kind of recent headlines. Like in the audience, how many people are, if I say the Google memo, how many people know what I'm talking about? Okay, so for those who don't know what that is, it was about just over a month ago, James Damore, who was an employee at Google, and they have kind of an internal message board where they have discussions about all sorts of things. And he had basically kind of published a blog post essentially where he talked about the fact that women are less biologically suited to be engineers than men, and therefore aren't represented equally in tech departments and leadership. And there was also a line where he claims that men have a, quote, higher drive for status. And so this was very controversial. He was fired. And so, this was in the headlines for several weeks. And so I'd like to know that as someone who's lived it, how does your experience stack up against Damore's theory? And kind of how do you feel like both, I think for women in particular looking to go into kind of tech and engineering fields, and for folks who are in it now, how they can kind of be thinking about their own role in light of the fact that this thinking is still, this isn't the early 70s, this is, we're in 2017. And this is out there, so just your thoughts on that.
I would love to see more women in engineering than we have today, and I would have thought by now that we would have a lot. When I was at Valpo, I was usually the only female in a math class. There was one class in the 4 years that there were 2 of us, and that was pretty exciting. But that doesn't happen very often, and today a lot of women are in science and engineering, but not as many as you might like. I had a wonderful, wonderful time with Dan White's semiconductor class this afternoon, and it was all seniors and it was all males. You women need to be over there because there's a lot of good stuff that they're doing, building chips and thinking in the semiconductor field. So that's electrical engineering, hardware engineering. That's not a field that women usually think of going into. In many cases, women don't know what the possibilities are, but engineering is a wonderful field for men and women. And, they can do equally well. I've never had a problem with strong women doing their job well. I've had problems with both men and women in some areas that they're not good at. Try to move them into something that they are better at. But overall, I was very frustrated with the Google memo because, of course, it might sell more of my books, though.
Right, it's true. It's true.
That's a plus. But you don't. You can't generalize. That was a very stupid thing for them to do.
Do you ever feel like there were moments early in your professional life where you felt like you were treated differently because you were a woman?
Oh yes, but it was kind of a fun time to be to be working because, and I think it's still true today, the areas of computer science and computer engineering are, there are more things to build and more people needed than there are people available. So as long as there's a shortage, and when I was first starting in computer science, there was a huge shortage. They didn't have enough computer science people. And so, of course, it didn't make any difference if it was a woman or a man, or if it was a tall person or a short person. They didn't care as long as there was somebody that could do the job. And I think that's still true in many cases in a lot of the fields and in science and engineering. And I think that women need to take advantage of it, and men will then learn to live with a mixture.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the book is, you talk about the fact that, you had your kids before you entered into the computer science field or software engineering, and that there had been somebody in one of the companies that you were working for, and you kind of have this moment in the book where you reflect on the fact that, man, like to take maternity leave now, you're gone and things are changing so quickly that when you come back, there's actually a lot to catch up on. And so it's funny because I feel like the pace of kind of technological innovation today is even so much more that what can happen in, a span of several months now is just kind of incredible. And so do you feel like it is easier today to be a woman entering a technological or engineering field, or do you feel that in some ways kind of the pace of innovation has made it even harder?
Some of it is hard, I think, because people do things at a later time than they used to. We also live longer, so maybe that's okay. But if you, in my generation, you usually had children when you were quite young. And I've watched a lot of women engineers working for me that waited till they were 35 or something like that. Well, by the time you're 35, you've got a pretty good job. You've got a good position. You're doing some really fun technology. And if you step out, then you have to back up and kind of find your spot again. Whereas if you do it first, you get out and do it when you're very young, you just have a job and you'll get another one like that very easily. So I think that for many women, when they get to a certain point and then they want to, and they have a very responsible position, they have a number of people working for them, they don't want to give that up. And so then it's harder to make that trade-off and get a nanny and find ways to mix both of them and not stop.
Well, I do think that one of the things about your story that I just love is that more than being known as like the female anything, you were the kind of go-to problem solver, and independent of male, female, whatever, that time and again, you were the manager who's tapped for really challenging projects. And one of the tensions that seemed to kind of emerge continuously is this idea of wanting to be an individual contributor, wanting to kind of know the tech more intimately or know what the needs were more intimately and actually be kind of doing the work, but time and again being asked to be the one kind of supervising the work and supervising the people doing the work. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk about kind of finding balance between the two, but then eventually it seems like you really kind of came to embrace the executive side and oversee some pretty substantive projects and really advocate for your team, and that became something that I feel really kind of defined, especially the back half of the book, and kind of your professional story. So just talking a little bit about that and transitioning from individual contributor to kind of leader of many.
I like both. I love technology, so it's fun to be part of the design team and working on pieces, and you lose some of that as you go into the management area. But I kind of mixed and matched, went back to other things for a while. When I went to Mitsubishi Electric, I had been managing 250 engineers, and Mitsubishi gave me $6 million for our project to complete, and 6 people. and so I had to hire the others enough with that $6 million, hire enough people so that, and build a chip and have it ready in 18 months. So it was a big project, but yeah, that's okay,
Yeah, oh my God. Well, I think that you are really good at building effective teams. And so I think that, I feel like at Valpo we talk a lot about leadership and what leadership looks like, but that one of the things that I think you were great at was finding people who were going to be good teammates. And that in moments when you're not necessarily the one in the leadership role, but you are more of kind of a member of a working team, in your experience, what makes a good teammate? When you're hiring and trying to find the right people, what are the qualities that you're looking for to kind of put together the type of team that can achieve the things that you were able to achieve in 18 months, with less money than you should have? How do you find the right teammates and what makes a good teammate?
There's a lot of different things. I think I remember one man that was absolutely easy to work with. He was a project leader, and when he completed a version 1 product, which was a language-sensitive editor that worked with 8 languages and allowed a computer engineer to build things very efficiently. We put that out. It sold millions of copies, and in over 3 years, they only had 3 reports back of any problem whatsoever. I mean, that's just unheard of, that you could build software that was so clean that no one ever reported a bug. And so you think, well, how did he, when I had a team, why was his team a good team? And it was because of him. He didn't let anybody put anything back into his stuff from his team unless they followed certain rules. And if they copied a piece of code because it was the same as something else, he'd catch them on it. He'd say, no, wait a minute, is that exactly the same? Do you need to modify it? And how do you need to do it? And he was so careful with what his whole team put into his code that his code just didn't have bugs. It was just always perfect. And so a lot of it is, who is that strong person on the team that can put those kinds of instill all that kind of good engineering into the rest of the team. Some of that is true. Sometimes you need a mixture that one plays against another. So you say, well, I've got a good team, and this guy is really very good at innovation and thinking up new things, and so I've got to put somebody on the team that'll balance them and really come out. And teams are different, and I think the managers have to be really good at telling them what is needed and making sure that they're doing the right things. And there's just a lot of fun things that you do, and you have to watch. Managers need to watch, and that's the fun of management. That's a fun part. I got to go back and get a patent on some of the work that I did after I was a manager when I went back to Mitsubishi, because I had 6 people and grew them to 27. I had time to do my own design as part of it. So it's fun to do that, but as a team, you really want everybody on the team to be pulling in the same direction with the same amount of things. And sometimes it's who you select, and sometimes it's the person that you select to lead it. And then there's another thing. I did a project at Digital Equipment Corporation where we were building they had an operating system called VMS. It was probably one of the, used in industry, it was one of the most reliable operating systems, so people like to build their applications on that operating system. And now they were coming out with new hardware, which was RISC architecture instead of CISC, and it was 64 bits instead of a normal 32 bits, and it was a wonderful piece of hardware, but people would want, and we had 15 million users. They all had to have their old applications still work on this new thing. They didn't want a new piece of anything. They wanted a reliable machine that was the same as the old one. And you couldn't be the same because the underlying basis was gone. It was all different. And so we struggled with that. We solved the problem. We figured out how to make something that looked exactly like the old machine, mostly through software on this very fast RISC architecture. What they had done for many years is that they had taken these systems, these VMS systems, and clustered them together. So 6 of them together could operate as one machine. So if one machine used up all of its cycles, it could send the work over to the other machines, and you wouldn't know the difference. So you might buy one machine, and then your company would say, oh, I need more help. buy a second machine, I'll buy a third machine. And it all seemed like it was one machine working. And so now that we had this new architecture, they wanted us to do the same thing. So you want to build that same thing and have clusters of these new machines that could act as one machine. And so we're working away with that. And then we realized that that was going to be a failure. It would be a total failure, because if you own 7 machines and you have them all together, you're not going to go out and buy 7 new ones to cluster together over here. You want to buy one more machine of that new kind, and you want it to work with all the old ones. Well, we didn't have the technology to do that. We didn't know how to do that. We had no idea. And I remember we were in a meeting saying, we don't know how to do this, but we're going to have to, and we have 6 months to figure it out and deliver it, and that's what we're going to have to do. And I remember describing what we needed to this crew of engineers, and after a period of time, somebody came up with one thought, and they discard that, and someone came up with another one, and everything was pretty much discarded. But I noticed that one little fellow named Sandy Sneeman had kind of said, well, he was kind of quiet. I think you could do this with this and this, and they discarded him very quickly. And so as a team, they had discarded something that I saw that could be an idea. Everything else was gone, but he wasn't being listened to by his team. And so we went back out, and I got his manager and his supervisor and myself and Sandy, and we sat and said, we want to listen to your idea again. Tell us exactly how it could work. Well, with a small group of people, he had no problem describing what he thought could make it work. And we threw it around for a while, and then found that it was exactly, it was very possible that that solution could work. So then that team, as a manager, that team was then charged with doing that. And there were 27 of them, and they finished it on time, and they did it, and they validated that it worked perfectly, and it was very excited. And Sandy was the critical member of that team. But nobody would have guessed that from just looking at the team. He was very quiet, very seldom said anything, but he had an idea in his mind. So the rest of the team's got to be able to listen for those things, and otherwise you don't work as a good team.
Right. One of the things that
was a long answer.
No, that's a great answer, and that's I think one of the really interesting things is your ability to lead and manage and kind of supervise people and be able to spot people like Sandy. Mm-hmm. That I think is part of what made you such a good leader. Also, though, you worked for a lot of not so great leaders. There are some folks that, again, as you're telling the story, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I was working for that person, I would want to just like shake him, because it was just crazy that whether just being like dismissive or just obtuse, some of these folks. But what is some of your advice for working with managers who aren't great? Because I think that it can be one thing that when you have a great boss, I mean, that's a wonderful situation. But when you have someone who's not hearing you, or who you don't feel like is really advocating for you in the way that you need to be advocated for, how do you make the best of those types of scenarios?
Sometimes you have to just work around them. And that's easy to say, that's hard to do. One of my first jobs, I was being sent to, when I did the cracks in the airplane wings, I worked for a man who had 12 children. And his wife didn't work. She was home taking care of these 12 children. And he believed that's where women should be. And so he said he didn't want me when they assigned me to his project. And so they went through a bunch of things, and he agreed to take me if they would guarantee that I would stick with him for 2 years. And of course, whoever did it said, of course, and there I was. And so, and that was because he thought women would leave. He was sure that women would leave. It would last 2 years. So I got to about 1 year and 3/4, and we had successfully completed 2 wonderful projects for him in that period of time. And they did exactly what he needed to have done, and everything was perfect. And And then another part of the company asked if I could be pulled over and to take over a job which was way better. The job that I had, there were 2 of us on the team. We did all of the work, and I was going to move into an area where there were 27 people, and it was a good project. And it looked like it was a good, wonderful opportunity for me. And he popped up and he said, "Well, yeah, but you promised me that this person would stay here for 2 years." Well, that was the end of my thing. And of course, he wasn't real fond of me from the beginning just because I was female. So I went back in and I said, "Okay, I'll be there, but I want to be the project leader for the team." And that had never happened to him ever. He didn't care that I was a woman. I was a software engineer, and a hardware engineer had always headed the teams. And so he didn't believe a software engineer could head the team. And so there are a lot of different things that you can say, well, yeah, if I can lead the team, I will take it. And that was enough for me to let me go. So he let me go do the other things, which was probably a negative, but it accomplished what I wanted to do. And you have to kind of watch how be assertive for yourself, but make sure you get the kinds of jobs that you want to work on. And there are a lot of them that are very exciting to work on, so that's really what you want to be able to do.
You talk a lot about the fact that there was this thing that seemed insurmountable, but we just needed to figure out how to do it. You say again and again that there wasn't a problem that you couldn't solve. You just kind of had to figure out the way in. And so you have all these great stories with different colleagues where, you figured it out and you kind of found the way and that was able to happen and you achieved this and you were able to do that and, again, do it with less money than you needed in a crazy time span, and it was kind of amazing. But then there's this point towards the end of the book, and I'm gonna read the quote directly, where in the world of politics within the company, I had lost. In trying too hard to achieve my purpose, getting the projects completed well and on time, I hadn't played the game of company politics. So with the benefits of hindsight, are there any decisions that you would make differently today? Do you feel like if you could go back, you would have played the politics differently? Or do you feel that the things that you kind of achieved in kind of doing the more kind of yeoman's work of meeting deadlines and making that happen, that in the end was its own reward? Or I guess just, is there anything you would do differently?
I got to do a lot of things that were really fun. And so I'd hate to give up probably any of them. I got to do a lot of really good things. I was lucky because I have a husband that supported me, so that I suggest you all someday look for a spouse that is excited about what you're doing. But engineering overall is just fun. There's a lot of challenge, and no, you don't know how to do something when they tell you to do something. You may not have any idea, so you try something and you do the best you can and you get pretty close and you say, oh, that's still not going to accomplish what the customer needs. So you modify it again, and maybe it isn't exactly what you started out to build, but you got really close and you maybe made some things better than what was in the original plan. I think that's really important, that you always go for doing the interesting and fun stuff, and it's got to challenge your mind. It's got to be something that gives you a reason to go into work in the morning because it's exciting to do, and that's what you want. And engineering is pretty much building things, and a lot of the building things are that no one knows how to build them. Nobody's ever done it before, so you do start from scratch.
Well, I have one last question for me, and then we're going to open it up to the room. And again, I'm going to read a slightly longer passage from the book. An engineer isn't asked if something can be built, nor does an engineer ask if it can be done. An engineer hears from customers or from marketing or from his boss that a certain thing must be created. He is assigned to the team that is to do it, and then the questions begin. How can this be done? What is the optimal way to complete it? And if that just isn't feasible, what's an acceptable alternative? But there is no question that it will be accomplished. I read this and I thought to myself, that is such a fearless approach to your professional task. And so it was kind of the last question for me. Have you been able to apply this fearless attitude outside of the workplace, or how has your kind of engineering disposition impacted the way that you problem solve outside of work?
I think we do carry stuff into our regular life. There's always something else that you want to do and that you figure out how to do it. So I think that I've certainly done that a lot of times in my life. A lot of things are just not in your control. So you may want your child to do certain things, and that's never going to happen. So you can't do that. But certainly, if you set your mind to do something, you can make it happen. If you set your mind to doing it, then you just figure out the hows. And how are you going to make it happen, and how can you make that happen? And that's all good. And you have a lot of obstacles. And one of the big things I said, and I will talk about Elizabeth over here. Somebody just put this mic on me, and I put it on. I'm left-handed, so I put it on upside down. So mine was upside down, and it was on the wrong side. That's the way that this was. Somebody built it for right-handed people. And I'd often use that as my example for women and men. You know, somebody would say, well, she can do such and such. And I never said I'm female or I'm the software engineer and you're the hardware engineer. I would say, well, you know, they're bothering me because I'm left-handed again. So that always became my minority default, and it works. And then people just see you as people, and then you can get back to the real job of what you want to do.
Questions from the audience? We have about 15 minutes. So let's go away.
How many people in here are engineers or scientists or mathematicians? Okay. Okay. How many people in business? Business related.
Business management and administration.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. The business of engineering is a really powerful thing, and it's a fun area to go in. And so I found that very satisfying. It's equally, business of other things are also equally good, so that I think you want to be able to search for a career that you're going to have fun in. And I think that the interesting thing is that, you know, you may say, oh my goodness, the only company that offered me a job is Caterpillar Tractor. I don't want to work for a Caterpillar Tractor company, you know. But that might be just, the job offer might be just what you would have for experience that would give you that. So don't discount things just because you don't have any idea what that is or how that works. But you're going to have a general background when you leave Valpo. So take that general background and get some experience with it, and then figure out what you're going to want to do. And if you look at what I've done a whole gamut of things over a career, and it won't stay the same. You won't stay doing the same thing. There will be other opportunities, and you'll want to grab those. You're not committing yourself for a lifetime of something when you take your first job.
Since they're being quiet, I'll ask a question. You've done lots of really neat, cool projects. Which project or thing that you've worked on are you most proud of, and why?
That's a good question. I have a couple, but I think the one I'm probably most proud of is the one that I held the chip up for Mitsubishi Electric. We built a chip that allowed people to do volume rendering in real time, and it made a difference, especially in the medical field. It made a huge difference to the medical field. Mitsubishi had us come. I was able to go to Japan and receive the President's Award for Technical Excellence for that product. And no American had ever done that before. So they give a president's award for who brought in the most money. I didn't get that. But I got the, I was able to have the award for technical excellence, which was pretty fun and pretty powerful. Yeah. Yes.
Was there ever a moment where you thought that like maybe it wasn't for you? but
Tell
you could
me
do it?
again.
Was there ever a moment where you thought that maybe it wasn't for you and that you couldn't do it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Did you ever think, oh, I can't do this? Sometimes you just have to go to bed, get up in the morning and look at it again, because there's just no way to do it. Your mind keeps working, and sometimes it's other engineers. Sometimes you just say, I cannot do this, and you're sitting at lunch and you're saying, I can't make it work. There's no way that we're going to be able to do this. And somebody at the table will say, well, did you ever try such and such? That was all you needed then to kind of wake you up. And, but, oh yes, a lot of times you just think, this just can't be done. I can't figure it out. You can do that with a Sudoku puzzle. So there's a lot of things that are just hard, but you stick with it. Yeah. Somebody else had their hand up. Okay.
You had mentioned the idea of seeking out other opportunities in different areas. I was just wondering how, in your experience, you went about learning about these other opportunities and then switching over from what you were doing to seeking out this new opportunity.
That's also a good question. How do you find other opportunities? When I was at Digital, a man worked for me that built the kernel of the operating system. And that's the hardest part of the operating system that you can build. And he had a team of 7, and it was always good. He kept it clean. It was always working just perfectly. And when I talked to him one time, he said, I did dumb things when I gave performance reviews. And one of the things I would tell people way back then was, you ought to build a resume and send it out and make sure that you really like working here, which was really a dumb thing to do. But people did that. Make sure that this is what you want to be doing. And so I said it to this man, a young man, and he said, I could never do that. I can't send out a resume because there's nothing I'm doing that I could tell anybody about that's any good. How would I tell them about another job? And I thought, he's probably one of my very best engineers. He's got the hardest part of the operating system. He's really, into making sure everything is working correctly, so his mind is all working. And he doesn't have anything to say if somebody wanted, if he wanted a job. And so I waited a little bit and came back, and we had this new 64-bit operating system. But the kernel wasn't using 64 bits. It was still only using the 32 bits. And to make it use 64 bits was almost impossible. And I just came in and said, Mike, if you can make this use the 64 bits, you could describe that well enough that you could go anywhere in the country and you could have a job. And so he did it. I left the company, and 2 years later he sent me an email and sent me a whole bunch of paraphernalia and said, I did it, I'm done. I was able to do it. He got a job a couple of years later at Oracle. And I'm sure that was because of that he could articulate what he'd been doing. So some of it is just make sure you can articulate what it is you're good at. Make sure you can know that. And then just kind of keep your eye out. And how do you keep an eye out? Well, some of it's networking. Some of it's, you've got friends here. You graduate and keep in touch with them. And somebody says, boy, I've got this really cool job at such and such a place and we're short 3 people. And look into it, see if that would be, if you're not happy with what you're doing. But always be thinking about, well, what else could I be doing? And am I happy here? And if you're happy there, keep staying there. That's fun. But if not, just kind of look around. A lot of people can look around within the same company if it's a big enough company, you can have other opportunities and just kind of make yourself known that that's the thing you want to do next. Yeah, it is a hard question though, you know, it's, yes. I agree with Jill.
Okay, do you still work or are you retired? You still doing the same work?
I'm retired. I've worked for a lot of years. Once in a while I do a little consulting, but in general I'm retired. I love to talk to students. I've spoken at Georgia Tech and places in Boston area, because I think that I'm very passionate about getting people into engineering and science. There's just a lot of opportunity there, and I feel that not enough people are taking advantage of it.
We do want to honor everyone's time, so a few kind of closing announcements. One, I highly recommend Bev's book, Skip the Typing Test, I'll Manage the Software. It is available on Amazon.com. You should read it. It's very, very good.
Thank you.
On a lot of different levels. I think especially just in terms of I think the stories about managing people, I think that is hard work no matter what field you're in. And so it's a great book, I think, for that. And then there are a lot of other layers to it, but Skip the Typing Test, I'll Manage the Software. Also, our next Pathways to Purpose speaker is on October 18th. His name is Cam Buckner. He is the Executive Director of World Sports Chicago, and he'll be talking on athletics and justice, translating leadership from the field to your communities. Even if you are not an athlete, he is a fantastic guy, and he has quite a story. And so I encourage you to come out for that. And our next skill building workshop on thriving in diverse teams, and that's all about kind of expanding how you think about diversity and learning how to be part of a successful team, understanding what you bring to the table, and how to work with people who are different from you. That is going to be on October 25th. So if you would all just join me in giving Beverly Schultz a round of applause.